All right, future health facility administrators. This module is over labor expense. I once had an executive director tell me that your labor will be 65% of your actual expense and about 65% of your headaches. But if you can manage it well, it can also be your strength. All right, guys. So, even though this course is a finance course, there are some qualitative variables I want to talk about related to labor and labor expense. Some of them you've already heard of, some of them you may not have. So, there are some unique challenges related to managing your labor and labor expense in nursing homes. Uh, I do think by now you've probably heard of some of them. The industry as a whole has a significantly high turnover compared to other industries. There are a lot of reasons for that, and many of those reasons are outside the scope of this course. But I want to go over some of the qualitative and quantitative factors. I am sure you've already heard about some of the qualitative factors related to the unique challenges of managing the chronically ill, taking care of patients, the emotional demands associated with that. There are also many physical demands related to working in nursing homes. It is what it is. Even if you are the director of nursing, when you are walking down the hall, if you see a call light, you are expected to go into that room and help that patient, whether it's getting water, whether it's needing help to the restroom. There are a lot of demands on our labor force. And those are some qualitative variables that make what you're going to do in managing that labor force very unique. So, other than some of the qualitative variables that I think by now in your studies you've already heard of, the high turnover, the emotional demands, the physical demands, the things like that, I want to bring up two variables that I think also add to the qualitative challenges related to managing your labor and labor expense. I'm sure by now you know that nursing homes are highly regulated. Uh, back about 10 years ago when I did my AIT and I was taking some of my courses, the very first page of one of our textbooks said that nursing homes were the second most regulated industry in the country at that time behind nuclear, which is crazy to even think about. But the number of regulations that you will have to manage as an administrator really is astronomical. Now, what that does in the scope of this course is your staff, your department head, your line staff, they have to work in that environment. And it causes a lot of stress, a lot of high stress situations. And that's very challenging for you to manage. It'll be challenging for your staff to work in. Listed here are some of just the common surveys that we go through. You're going to go through the state health inspection. You're going to go through the complaint surveys related to health inspection. You will go through federal health inspections. I've been through one. You'll go through Medicaid audits, Medicare audits. You will go through Medicaid utilization reviews, where the fiscal intermediary will come in or do it remotely, and they will look at everything that you're doing for that patient and how it's being coded. You will go through additional documentation requests from Medicare or from a managed care. You will have fire marshal surveys. You will have state life safety surveys where they come in and they look at the physical plant of your building. They look for safety. You will have labor board reviews. You will at some point be on the phone with a judge, an administrative law judge, going over what your building's doing related to labor or unemployment. And you will, believe it or not, you will have the attorney general for your area do an investigation. One time um, I had a family who didn't understand it was a distant family, not someone that really ever came in, didn't really understand how the Medicaid program worked in Indiana. didn't understand that their relative had a liability payment that they had to pay, and then Medicaid paid the rest. And this person called the state and basically said that our nursing home was stealing the person's money. Now, this person was a Medicaid beneficiary, so that's a really big deal. You're basically being accused of stealing not just from the patient, but from the state, right? It's state funds. Well, when there's a complaint that egregious, the state then will contact the local attorney general investigator. So, on many occasions, you will have a Medicaid attorney general come in to investigate whether or not there is misappropriation of funds. Now, all of that you might think, why is he bringing that up on a module about labor? We got to understand, it's not just you. You have the responsibility of all of that. You're the administrator, your license on the wall, but your staff goes through that too. That's a very stressful situation. Think about it. Not only is it hard enough to take care of the chronically ill, but you're going to have to manage and work with your nurses and your CNAs and your cooks and your housekeepers while they're being surveyed. Why they have someone standing over them with a laptop watching them provide hands-on care. Why they are watching them prepare food, serve food. It's a constant environment like that. So I am sure you have heard about the high turnover, the stress, the emotional, physical demands. But one reason why all that is true is because it's a very stressful environment that a lot of people outside of this world don't understand. And your role is going to be to manage that and to help your staff, lift them up when they need to be lifted up, help them get through those surveys. It's very challenging. A second qualitative factor that will affect labor that I do think is often overlooked by people outside the industry is you could take the CEO of a health system. They cannot legally run a 50-bed nursing home. Think about that. You're taking the CEO of a health system, maybe over 30 hospitals. Legally, they cannot run a nursing home. You could take someone who has worked as a patient care tech, maybe in a hospital setting or inpatient rehab setting or home health. They cannot work as a CNA in a nursing home. You can take the best chef, maybe someone who oversees multiple restaurants. They cannot work as a certified dietary manager in a nursing home legally. Almost every position that you're going to manage requires a state issued license or some type of certification. Now, think about that. You know that you will have to have a health facility license to run a nursing home. You know that you will have to have a director of nursing who is at least an RN. That's pretty well known. But almost every other staff in that nursing home will have to have some type of state issued license or certification. Your dietary staff, you have to have a certified dietary manager. Doesn't matter how great they are at a cook. Doesn't matter how many restaurants they've owned. They have to be a certified dietary manager. You want to hire a cook? Doesn't matter how many years of experience they have. They need to be serve safe. You want to hire an activity coordinator? They may be the best activity coordinator in the country, but they have to have the certification, the activity designee certification. You want to hire a social worker? Unless they have a bachelor's in social work or a master's, it doesn't matter how good they might be at that job. They need to have a social service designee or the applicable degree. And then obviously, RNs, LPNs, QMAs, CNAs, so many of your employees will have to have a license or a certification in good standing that it just adds more challenge to what we have to manage, because you can't just take anyone off the street, no matter how good they may be, no matter how much they want to work in that environment. Many times they have to be licensed or certified, and that adds some unique challenges to what we do. So the last qualitative factor that I want to go over before we dive into the quantitative stuff, the nuts and bolts of labor expense, is something that was told to me a long time ago. And I don't know if I really believed it at that time, but over the years and working in the industry and working with other administrators and director of operations, and I have found it to be true. And you know, when you're running a sniff, when you're the person in charge, you're really only going to be as good as the staff around you. And if you think about it, it's kind of common sense, but until you really think about it, I don't know if you can appreciate it. In our industry of taking care of people, you have people taking care of people. That is the soul of what we do, right? So the only way you can have a good nursing home is to have good people, have good staff in that building. It's a people business. Second, and this is something that I really did not appreciate until later, your nursing home will take on your personality. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. If it doesn't matter if you have a little 50-bed stereotypical nursing home that just takes care of the elderly, or you're running a larger 175-bed CCRC, that your people, your staff, will take on your personality. If you're walking up and down the hall and you're disheveled and you're chaotic and you're always kind of running around, don't really know what you're doing, like your hair's on fire, that filters down to your department heads and to your line staff, and that's how they're going to act. If you walk around and you put the dollar first and all you care about is making money, that's going to filter down to your line staff. It The way you act, the way you respond is going to filter down to your line staff. And it's something that, like, again, maybe a little bit outside the scope of when we're looking at labor and labor expense, but there's a couple things that I really wanted to impress upon you guys that was told to me a long time ago, but until you get into it and you start doing it, there are things that you don't realize until you realize, if that makes sense. So that's it for the qualitative factors. Now let's get into the quantitative factors. All right, so for our first of the quantitative factors, what we're going to do is we're going to go over full-time equivalents per patient day, budgeted hours compared to actual hours worked, budgeted dollars compared to actual dollars spent. Those four bullet points. Now, we could probably have a whole class on managing labor expense, the different reports associated with that, but for this course, those four bullet points are what we're going to focus on. All right, so full-time equivalent, FTE. It's very common, and it is very, very common in other industries. Now, in nursing homes, you're still going to use them. You need to know what they are. And I'll show you like a very basic example of how we use them. They're not near as common as PPD. But what is it? An FTE is basically how many hours does one employee need to work to be considered full time, right? We have full time employees, we have part time employees, and we have PRN or as needed employees. So, why does it matter? Well, it matters for a variety of reasons. So, you need to know what is an FTE for your company. So, uh, for example, in the calculations that you will do, our FTE will be 40 hours, meaning in 1 week, if you have an employee who works 40 hours, they are considered a full time equivalent. However, that's what we're going to use. But the Affordable Care Act has said that a full time equivalent is only 30 hours. That's a big deal because as a manager, as the administrator, there are some expenses associated with a full-time equivalent that you don't have with someone that is part-time, right? Uh, Full-time employees should be eligible for health insurance, maybe dental, maybe vision, vacation, paid time off, 401k, maybe even a pension plan. So the difference between a full-time equivalent, someone who is considered full-time, and part-time is significant. When you're looking at it, if for our purposes a full-time equivalent is 40 hours, that means one FTE is someone who worked 40 hours that week. So 1.5 FTE means 60 hours that week. 2 FTEs would be 80 hours that week. It's a way of taking the hours worked, the hours out there, and correlating it to people, to the actual people doing the work. So with an FTE, here is a very basic, maybe a little oversimplified, but it's a good example of how we can use FTEs in managing our labor expense. So if you go to your ward clerk or your scheduler or what have you, probably they're going to come to you. To be honest, probably they'll go to maybe their charge nurse or the director of nursing or the assistant DON or whatever, and then they will end up in your office and they will say, "We have so many holes in the next schedule. We have to have 9 people. We need 9 people to cover the next schedule." Now that may be true. All right. And let's go back to some of the qualitative stuff we talked about, how you intake that information, how you handle that information, how you respond to that information is a very big deal and will dictate how those managers respond to their line staff. But staying with the quantitative viewpoint, if they come to you and say, "Hey, we have 9 holes on our next 2 week schedule. We need 9 people, maybe even 10 people." So let's look at that. All right. If each hole represents a 12-hour shift that needs to be filled by an LPN or an RN or maybe even a QMA to dive into it, how many people do we actually need? It makes sense why someone would say, "Hey, we have 9 holes in the next schedule. We need 9 people." That makes sense. But uh, do you? Well, it really depends upon the FTEs and how you calculate the FTE. It also depends upon things like overtime, things like that. But for this purpose, let's take our 9 holes, okay? And then if each hole represents 12 hours needed, that means you have 108 hours that you have to fill in that next schedule. Well, so how many bodies do we need? How many people do we need? Well, take that 108 hours. And if your FTE equals 40, meaning one FTE equals 40, that's 2.7 FTEs needed. You need almost 3 people to fill those holes if everyone is working full time. Okay. Now, what if an FTE is 32 hours? That changes the equation drastically. You still have 108 hours to fill, but if one FTE for your company is 32, now you need a little over three, you need 3.3 people, almost 3.5 people. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to cut someone in half, but that helps quantify, okay, this is how many people we need. And then from there, you have to figure it out. Maybe you have a lot of companies recently have established their own staffing agencies within the company. They have float staff that will go between the buildings, and then they will charge that building a little bit more to incentivize that ED to not use their internal agency. You obviously have external agencies that will travel and gouge the provider by charging an arm and a leg, and then you have people for an agency working side by side with the internal staff. That's never good. But the point of the FTE is to quantify, hey, how many people do we need to fill those holes? It's just a starting point. And this is an oversimplified example, but that is a real world exercise that you'll probably have to do in nursing, in dietary, in housekeeping, laundry, things like that. All right, so let's look at PPDs. And before we dive into some of the calculations, it's important to understand that PPDs are the industry standard. It really, really is. Um, in the 10 years that I've been working in this industry, I have only known one company who created a budget off of FTEs. And I only know that because the administrator came to me and basically said, hey, my CFO, who, by the way, was a CPA who had never actually ran a nursing home, handed me a budget that's all FTEs, no PPDs. So what did we do? We basically reverse engineered the budget to create PPDs because it is such an industry standard to utilize PPDs that you're really only going to see FTE budgets with positions that basically require one person. Like that a nursing home has to have a licensed health facility administrator to run the building. Now you may have an assistant, you may have an AIT in the building, but you have to have at least one. You have to have one ED. Okay, director of nursing is the same. You have to have one, at least an RN or BSN, be the licensed director of nursing. Uh, Dietary manager, you have to have one, right? But then outside of those, everything will be on a PPD basis, which makes sense, okay? PPD per patient day, okay? It makes sense because, almost all of, I'm sure by now you've heard of fixed cost, variable cost, semi variable cost. The difference between fixed cost and variable cost is a fixed cost, like your nursing home's mortgage, will probably be the same every single month. No matter how many patients you're taking care of, whether it's 100 or 50, you're going to have that same mortgage expense. A variable cost, the cost fluctuates proportional to the output. So, what is our output? Patients. We're taking care of patients. So, it makes sense. PPDs are a way to manage that variable cost within a nursing home because if on day one we have 100 patients to take care of, and then say by the end of the week we had 10 admissions, that changes a lot, right? You're going to need more RNs, more CNAs, more cooks, more laundry staff, right? So we do PPDs because what you're going to manage on an expense side is much more variable than other industries. The it's very across the country. It'd be very uncommon for a nursing home to say have 100 licensed beds and just run 100 every day. The fluctuation in the number of patients that you serve in a given year can be pretty drastic. I mean, I've seen 20, 25, 30 ups and down. It ebbs and flows with the seasons. I mean, think of what COVID did to everybody, right? So PPDs are a way to manage that variable cost based upon a fixed budgeted number, okay? So now let's look at some examples, and I think it'll make sense. All right, so let's look at an example of how to calculate patient days over a given period. Now, the only way to calculate a PPD is to know patient days. Patient days is something that it is historically my students have struggled to get it at first. And then once you do it, once you calculate it, it's one of those things that like once you get it, it's like, oh, okay, well that's simple. Why was it hard for me to understand that? So let's look at this period right here. Okay, we have uh, this is 1 week, days of the week, the date, and the census for that day. Okay, so let's look at Sunday. the first day of our period. We have 83 patients in our nursing home. I hate the term, but I've heard the term a lot. It's called heads in the bed. How many heads do you have in your beds? If you are a 100-bed nursing home on Sunday, the first day of that period, you have 83 heads in the bed. So as of midnight on that first day, you have 83 patient days. Okay? Now let's go to Monday. So on Monday, you get an admission. So now you have 84. You have 84 heads in the bed on Monday. So on Monday night at 11:59 p.m., how many patient days do you have so far in this period, meaning Sunday to Monday? Well, you had 83 days on Monday. You have 83 days on Sunday, 84 days on Monday. You add those together, and as of midnight on Monday, you have 167 patient days. Okay? So now let's go to Tuesday. So on Tuesday, hey, you have another admission. Okay? So on Sunday, you had 83 heads in the bed, 83 patient days. On Monday, you added one more. You now have 84 heads in the bed. On Tuesday, there's another one. Now on Tuesday, you have 85 heads in the bed. So how many patient days do you have so far for that period, meaning Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday? Well, you're going to have 83 plus 84 plus 85, 252 patient days. Now, I can keep going, but I think by now you probably get it. Where people confuse patient days is because patient days is a number of days. It doesn't mean the number of patients. You look at the number of patients, the heads in the bed, every single day, and then you add those up for whatever period that you're wanting to look at, and that will give you patient days. So if we go to the bottom here, Sunday through Saturday, 1 week, here's the daily census, daily heads in the bed. Okay, we started out at 83, we ended at 86, a pretty small change. I mean, it could fluctuate much more than that. But to keep the math simple, we're only plus 3. Okay, so how many patient days did we have for that week? Well, add up the heads in the bed every single day, and you're going to get 592 patient days for that week. Okay, so that means what was our average daily census for that week? Pretty simple. Take your patient days divided by the number of days in this period. So we're doing 7 days. So that means even though you started at 83 and you ended at 86, your average daily census, your average heads in the bed for that period was 84.57. That right there is a very basic example of how we calculate patient days. In order to calculate a PPD, you have to understand how to get to patient days. All right, so now that we understand how to calculate patient days, let's look at per patient day, okay? Uh, the slide did not upload the best. Let's right here got cut off, but all it says is budgeted hours. There's nothing behind this table. So per patient day, when you're given your budget, most likely you will get a budget in the term of PPD. Okay, they're probably not going to say, "Hey, for RNs, your budget is 4." They're probably not going to do that. For CNAs, they're probably not going to say, hey, you need to run 12 CNAs. They're most likely going to give you a PPD, okay? And there'll be a PPD budget for probably every position from your MDS coordinator to medical records, housekeeping, laundry. And what that does, that means for, let's say, for all of your CNAs, your budget is 3.05 PPD, okay? PPD is per patient day. So, based upon the number of patient days you're running, and let's think back to the previous slide, how to calculate patient days, that's take that times 3.05, and that's how many hours you can run. That's why it's considered budgeted hours for PPD. Okay, so the next slide, we actually calculate it. So let's look at an example of one category, just one, CNAs. On the previous slide, you saw a lot of jobs, a lot of job codes, a lot of job titles. We're going to look at one so we can understand how to utilize hours PPD. So I hope that this looks familiar to you. Okay, this was the very, very first exercise that we did together to understand patient days. We're doing 1 week again on Sunday. We have 83 heads in the bed. Again, I hate the term, but I think it makes sense. So if we're running 83 patients on that day, how many hours can we staff? Well, if our budgeted hours PPD for CNAs is 3.05, then what we do is we take that times the number of patient days, which on this period, Sunday was 83, and that tells us how many hours we can staff that day for the CNA category. Okay? And the same way that we worked through the problem in understanding how to calculate patient days, we do here again, okay? Let's now look at Monday, the next day. Remember, we had that admission, all right? So the number of heads in the bed went up by 1. How many hours can we run on that day for CNAs? Well, again, the CNA PPD budget is 3.05 times we have 84 heads in the bed that day. So that means on Monday, we can run 256 hours in 0.2 of an hour. It's not 20 minutes, but it's you often hear it say 256 hours and 20 minutes. It's not 20 minutes, it's 0.2. But anyway, that's how it's budgeted. Same thing for the next. So let's go to Tuesday, 1-3. We got another admission. Good deal. Our budget is still 3.05 PPD. So how many CNA hours did we run on Tuesday? 259.25. And just as patient days accumulated, so you could say, what is our patient days up to Tuesday, right? You will add 83, 84, 85. Well, what are our budgeted hours up to Tuesday? Well, same thing. You're just going to add up the daily budgeted hours based upon that PPD. So as of Tuesday, your total CNA hours you're allowed to run up to that point in the period is 768.60. So when you get through that whole period, which you'll find, and for us is 1 week, you'll find the total patient days is still that 592, which again, all we're doing is adding these numbers, the heads in the bed per day, will give us 592 patient days for that period. And then the total CNA hours budgeted. So if we know that we had 592 patient days and we're allowed to run 3.05 PPD for CNA hours, that means the budgeted hours for that period is 1,805.6 right here. And you can actually do the opposite way and you'll see it comes up to 3.05. The reason why we budget like this and you manage like this is because of the fluctuation in patient days. Like I said, in our example, to keep the math simple, we only went from an 83 in the first period to an 86. But it would not be uncommon. This is only 1 week. If we looked at a quarter, you may start the quarter at 83, but maybe you opened a specialty unit, a specialty rehab unit, maybe a specialty Alzheimer's unit. Maybe you opened a geriatric psych unit, maybe a drug rehab unit. Maybe there was a national pandemic that went through your area, and suddenly the need for your provider went up tremendously. Maybe you started the quarter at 83 and you ended the quarter at 93, right? It would be hard to manage that fluctuation without utilizing these fixed PPDs, taking at times heads in the bed to determine how many hours are you allowed to staff. This is only one job code, right? CNA. You'll have this for every single job code, from RNs to housekeepers and everything in between. Whatever company you work for, I would imagine probably have this down pat, and you'll have a very large labor report to help manage this and review this. But this is how the per patient day works. All right, so let's look at this in practice. We have the same numbers in our table. Why is a PPD such a crucial management tool to manage your labor cost? Well, if we look at the same table, we have the same week and we have the same patient days for each day, heads in the bed. So we have the same budgeted hours PPD for our CNA job code. It's doing the same thing. 83 heads in the bed times our budget of 3.05 tells us how many hours we're allowed to allowed to staff for that day. So why does it matter? Well, let's say we're at Monday. Monday morning, you walk in and your business office manager or your scheduler gives you the company's massive labor spreadsheet that shows everything from uh, average hours, dollars, wages, overtime, everything. One little excerpt here. It's Monday morning, Monday 8 a.m. You get the report. You're looking at, you want to know how your labor is doing. So you look at one job code, CNA. Again, this is Monday. So we're looking at Sunday, and you're like, okay, well, we had 83 heads in the bed. Our budget is 3.05 PPD. So we're allowed to run 253.15 hours for that day. Ooh, we ran 245. We ran 8 hours under. It's a Sunday. It's not an excuse, but weekends are very typically harder to staff. So you're under. Okay. So what do you do today? Now, this is an extreme example, but let's say, hey, I know that I'm out of the running gate 8 hours under. And now it's Monday. I have an admission coming. I'm going to be at 84. So that means my patient days so far for the period is 83 and 84. My budgeted hours for today, based upon 84 heads in the bed, is 256.20. Look, I get to staff more because my census went up. So then maybe you take that 8 hour that you worked under, and maybe you want to add that to Monday. Maybe you want to try to call someone in and say, hey, we're already starting out of the running gate 8 hours under budget. Let's go ahead and add 8 hours today. And then wait, we have another patient coming in. So the number of hours that we can run went up. Calculate that variance and tell me what you get. And hopefully that helps make it click, right? But let's say you're not a very good manager and you actually ran 268. So you ran 12.5 over what you should have ran just for that day. Well, so that kind of took away that 8 hours that you had extra. So now you're running 12.5 over. You do that exercise daily. You really do it daily. And you do that daily because if you don't do it daily, it will compound and you will take what appears on the surface to be a small problem. And before you know it, it's a big problem. And your director of operations is very upset with you, all because you didn't do this daily process. So after Sunday, you were 8 hours under. After Monday, you ran 12.5 hours over for that day. If you don't manage it daily, you get to the end of a period, any period, and you're not going to be at budget. So in this situation, this was not managed daily, right? Right here is what should have been ran in CNA hours every day based upon heads in the bed that day. Right here is the hours they actually ran. In a perfect world, those would be the same. Now, that will probably never happen. But for the purpose of our exercise in a perfect world, you want to run the actual hours based upon the budget. That didn't happen. So we get to the end of the period here, and we were budgeted to run 1,805.6 hours, which is our 3.05, but that didn't happen. We didn't run the 1,805. We ran 1,859.1. We ran 3.14. We didn't run 3.05. That's a 0.09 over for 1 week. Now, big deal, right? Well, here's the thing though. If you can't manage this process day by day, week by week, month by month, one day you will go into work, you will get a labor report, and you will be so far off budget that there will be no way to correct it. And let's look at that. In this 1 week, we only ran 0.09 off of budget. 0.09 seems like a very small number. So our PPD was over 0.09 for that 1 week. But let's annualize our patient days and see what impact that could have. Okay? So if for 1 week we ran 592 patient days, let's annualize that out. So there's 52 weeks in a year times the patient days for that week would give us an estimated annualized patient days of 30,784. Okay? Well, for that 1 week, we ran 0.09 over. Let's assume for the year we run 0.09 over. All right? That is 2,782 hours over budget for the year. Well, if you're running an average CNA wage of $18.50 with overtime and benefits and everything, that 0.09 overage, if not managed, say it just keeps on going, is over $50,000 over budget for one job code. Now, if you remember a couple slides ago, I showed you several job codes. This is only a 0.09 difference. Look at this. Budget versus actual. It's not a big difference. You're talking 54 hours. That's it. But if it goes unmanaged, it can be huge. In an industry where our margins are very small, a $51,000 overage for one job code would get you fired. You cannot do that. That's why we run PPDs. It allows us to look at our daily census, our daily heads in the bed, calculate our patient days within a given period, utilize the PPD budgets that are given to us, and then try to manage the up and down of our patient caseload, of our patient days. It's industry standard. It's one of those things that it seems very complicated until you get it, and then the light bulb goes off and it clicks. And you're like, oh, okay. So let's get into your assignment. I have a couple examples, and we'll continue to work together. Okay, so you have two assignments this week. One is a reading assignment with some blog posts, and the other is the Excel calculations. The first assignment here is your blog post. You're going to read an article that is relatively recent in McKnight's Long-Term Care. They're a very well-known, well-established long-term care news outlet. They have a lot of great articles, a lot of great information. And there's an article that discusses nursing home staffing crisis. So just as I started this lecture off with some of the qualitative challenges related to labor and labor expense, this article discusses some of those. You'll do a blog post and then you'll comment on someone else's blog post. The answers are a little subjective. Some of the answers you'll be able to find within the article, but all of which you're going to need to expand upon the reading, utilize other resources. Some of it is opinion based, but it should provide exercise for you guys to really think about some of the economic, the supply and demand reasons for the staffing crunch, also some of the qualitative things that we talked about, and quantitative. So it should be a pretty interesting assignment. Okay, so for your other assignment, you're going to do a labor Excel calculation. Okay, now um, the handout, the labor tool that you'll be reviewing and dissecting is a simplified version of actual real world labor reports that will be handed to you in the field, and you'll have to dissect. And a lot of what you're going to do with labor or anything is going to be take what you know, take how you manage, go out to your line staff, go out to your directors, and educate and teach and help them, right? Uh, there may be a situation where you're handed a labor report and you look at it, you pretend like you know what it says, and you hand it to maybe your scheduler or your food service director or what have you, your department head, and they are just so good at what they do that they just dissect it and they understand it and then they make it flow. Odds are that's not going to happen. Odds are you're going to have to dissect it yourself, understand it, and then teach it to your department head. So for the labor Excel calculation, it's a small example of some actual labor tools that you may be exposed to in the real world. It is fill in the blank. I'll repeat that. It is fill in the blank. Now, I make this assignment fill in the blank because I want you to understand how to calculate the the PPD hours, the PPD dollars, the FTEs. I'm not trying to trick you. So by doing a fill in the blank, you have the opportunity to look at the numbers on that uh, labor sheet and see how other cells are calculated, and that will help you answer the questions. Because at the end of the day, we're just trying to make sure that our labor expense is managed appropriately. And if our labor dollars are over or under, we want to know why, right? Did we run too many hours compared to budget? Is our average wage rate too high? Is it higher than budget? In the real world, not in this example, but in the real world, overtime and benefits play a significant role in managing your labor. So in this Excel handout, you will calculate the FTEs needed based upon the FTE budget. You will calculate the PPD based upon the PPD budget, the hours that you actually ran versus the hours budgeted. Same with dollars, the dollars that were paid out to your staff versus dollars budgeted. Let's take a quick look at an example from your assignment. All right, so here is a screenshot of one of your assignments, the PPD one, and let's look at it real quick together. What you'll see is right away, you're looking at a pay period, okay? And then it tells you the pay period census, the patient days. Now we know what built that number, the 2,492. We understand why that is our patient days and what to do with it. So in your assignment, to fill in the blank, you will fill in the yellow cells. So what that does, it allows you to look at what's already provided and see how it was calculated. And then you can go into the yellow cells and then you can figure out how to calculate it. So for example, right here we have job code 320. It's charge nurse, charge RN, and it tells you budget hours per day, per patient day is 0.18. Well, I think you know what to do. There is our patient days for the period. So, what are the budgeted hours for this period? Right here, right? Then it gives you the budgeted wage right here. Also, what is the budgeted dollars for the charge nurse? Well, we know we know the budgeted hours, we know the budgeted pay rate. We can determine the budgeted dollars for that job code. This is an example of your assignment. You will do it for PPD hours, PPD dollars, and you'll do it for FTE. And then at the bottom of the assignment, you'll have to answer questions, right? Did your nursing home for this period, did you come in at the whole, and in the aggregate, did you come in under budget, at budget, over budget, and why? Okay. If you came in, obviously it doesn't come in at budget. That would be a terrible assignment, right? It's if it comes in under or over budget, you need to look at it individually, meaning look at each job code individually, look at each job code variance, budget versus actual, both in hours and dollars, and try to determine why. Why were we over or under? Did we staff more hours than budgeted? Meaning, if you go back to that table where we started the period with 83 patients, 83 heads in the bed, and then at the end of the period, say we had 86, did we manage that daily? The variability of how we staff? Did we run the appropriate hours? Or are the wages just not in line? Which happens a lot. Maybe we're budgeted to have RN supervisor wage of 32.25, but let's say there's a shift in the market and we cannot get a charge RN for less than 35. Well, if that's the case, and even if you run the budgeted hours, you're going to be over on labor in your charge nurse because you're running a wage higher than budget. So in your assignment, you'll fill out this labor sheet, and then you're going to dissect it and talk about why were we under, why were we over, what do you think was the contributing factor. All right, guys. So that's module 4, labor expense. As I've already said, the assignment that you have, specifically the one where you're looking at the Excel spreadsheets and doing some calculations, is a derivative from a real world labor sheet that you would get when you have your own nursing home. So with that being said, don't ever hesitate to contact me if you are confused. The way we manage labor in the nursing home industry is very unique. It's very challenging, and these are real world examples. So, call me, text me, just say, hey, I'm confused on the assignment. Can we set up a time to talk about it? And I'll text you back. We'll set up a time. We'll go through it together. So, as always, if you need me, just let me know. right, future healthcare leaders, that is all for this module. Please comment below. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if there's a topic that maybe we need to cover that I can add to our coursework. Also, let me know if there's something that you think is maybe off base and we need to change up. Until next time, I'm Brody09s.